Hey there, folks, and welcome to another Tool Shed podcast. As you're aware, part of the Tool Shed and a big focus of the Tool Shed is on mental health and being able to have conversations about that, creating a place where it's safe to have those sorts of conversations. And on this episode, I'm speaking to Sonja Bottern, and she has a commitment and a passion for helping people in this space. And she has done lots of things that we're going to talk about, including, helping people that have dealt with suicide and all of these sorts of things, which is so prevalent. Too much of that is happening in the building industry. In fact, just the other week, and it just shocked us so much that the person that built this home that we're broadcasting from right now, and he only lives 3 doors down, built this home, and as it turns out, he was a relation of ours. My daughter married his nephew, and typical Tasmania, of course. We're moving into the house, and my daughter goes, "Oh, there's Uncle Jeff," we found out he lived in the street, and we found out he built this house, and he was an incredible, like a craftsman. The quality of it was just off the charts. And just a bit over a month ago, he took his own life with a rifle. And there's just far too much of this sort of thing happening. We need to talk about it. We need to address it. And that's why I'm super pumped to have Sonja in this conversation, because she's obviously got a lot of experience in this space. And I think we're going to learn a lot. So welcome to the conversation, Sonja. Really appreciate you being so generous with your time to be in this conversation. Let's get started by getting a bit of background on your story before I hit the record button. You grilled me, asked me what I'd been doing and how come I ended up here, and I was being interviewed, and it was a great conversation. Turning the tables now, how did you get to where you are, and how did you develop an interest in this space?
I don't think there's ever good morning, everybody, and thank you for inviting me here today. There's probably no one thing that you can necessarily put your finger on, but I've always been interested in the mental health space, mostly worked with young people in mental health, found myself drawn to the suicide prevention space, if you like, and had done a bit of work. But there certainly was one thing that did happen 2 years ago that cemented for me the reason why I'm in this space. My father was living with us. He was 85. We moved house. And about a month or 6 weeks after we moved house, he went out one night and didn't come back home again. He took his own life. So that really made it clear for me that was a space I needed to be in. So we call that sort of lived experience. Most of us probably have that or do have that lived experience around mental health. Not everybody has lost somebody that they know to suicide, but I did. And that really spurred my interest in setting up my own business, and also in the work that I do part-time for Jesuit Social Services in the support after suicide workplace that I'm in.
There's so many questions going through my mind, and I'll get most of them out, I think.
Yes. Okay.
The first thing is that I know that there's that old saying, that prevention is better than cure. And so with your experience, because there's all sorts of things that are out there, messages that are out there telling us to, reach out to people and ask if you're okay and those sorts of things. I was reading through a lot of what you've done, and one of the labels that popped up was mental health first aid, I think was
Yes.
along the lines of that. And I just assumed that was focused in on a preventative approach to things.
Yeah.
But most people listening to this aren't trained. They're just the average person who are really good at what they do, but they've got no training. They care about other people.
Yeah.
What do we do? What do we say? How do we help people, I guess, take that first step? What do they need to say? How do they need to approach it when they get a sense that someone's sad or, under the pump or feeling pressure or depressed or whatever the case may be? Where do we get started?
Actually, I'll take it a step back. During COVID, rates of suicides dropped, and that might be a bit contrary to what we might have thought. And to the best of our ability, what we think happened was there was a lot of information out there about help seeking. So they normalized the fact that you would probably be struggling during COVID, that there would be financial constraints, that their domestic violence rates had gone up, that having your children at home all the time, a number of things. We know a lot of small businesses struggled enormously during that period. But because they had put in place help-seeking messages, they had increased the number of mental health treatment plans that people could get. So that's when you go to your GP and you say, look, I just need to have a chat to somebody. You used to get up to 10, and during COVID, you could get up to 20. There were also a lot of apps. So people, we think, felt like there was somewhere to go and that it was okay to say they were struggling. Now that that has stopped, we have found some suicide rates have gone up again, unfortunately. We know that after there's been a traumatic event like COVID, about 2 years afterwards, we sometimes see numbers go up, and unfortunately we've done that. So I guess it comes back to asking for help, or perhaps the first step, how do I know that I need help? Because it seems people are not always aware themselves. They might say, this is normal, this is something I've always felt, it'll go away. And by the same token, you might look at your mates and say, oh, look, they're a bit down, but they'll probably get over it. We need to teach people how to recognize the signs around not traveling well and encourage them when they're not traveling well to go and get help. When you say mental health first aid, I do run that training, and it's the same as physical first aid. So why is it that we encourage people to go and learn how to do CPR in case somebody has a heart attack? We should be doing the same with mental health. How to do mental health CPR. So if you see somebody on the side of the road and they've collapsed or been in an accident, if you've done your physical first aid, you run through your head what could be some of the things that could be going on for them and what would I need to do. My training does the same, but with your mental health. So what are the things that tell you that it's kind of normal, and what are the things that, when do you actually need to start being a bit worried? So does that, sorry, I've probably gone around a bit, but does that answer that?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe in a bit that we'll talk about what that might look like, obviously without doing a full-blown training session, what would we need to learn,
Yeah.
The equivalent of CPR. And like my question, as you were talking, got even deeper about the preventative approach, because I think there's the prevention of the suicidal act, but also I'd like to talk about the prevention of being in a situation where you even start to have those thoughts. Like it comes from back I don't know 150 years ago when I was doing emotional freedom technique training, which is a weird tapping thing, and went over to the United States to do a 4-day course. And before they went there, they said, write a list of 10 things that sort of, when you think about them, you feel fear or overwhelm or whatever.
Yep.
And I did those lists, and I'd been involved in personal development for a long, long time, like since the very early 90s. And we used to even teach that your input determines your output, so stand guard at the entrance of your mind, all of that sort of stuff. And I've been doing that for years and years and years. Get to this session, and it's 4 sessions a day for 4 days. In the first session, you do a thing called borrowing benefits, where you tap along with the person who's in the front of the class with Gary, and they're working on a particular problem. Prior to doing that, you sort of figured out what your subjective units of distress were, your SUDs were, before. When you just think about that thing, it might be fear of flying. When you think about the plane taking off, when just thinking about it might have been a 7 out of 10 fear or something like that. And then after the session, they get you to measure it again, and miraculously, for the majority of people, it went down. My point with the whole story is, I couldn't get any, after the first session, I couldn't really get any distress or fear or anything negative happening with the other 9 things on my list after the first session. But I noticed a lot of the other people there, who obviously mostly Americans because they're in America, they would, over the 4 days, they would have worked on their 10 things, but they seem to pull out another list of another 10 things and they feel that because I've got this preventative strategy, this tapping thing, I don't need to worry about the actual prevention and standing guard at my mind, so I don't need it. To me, it's a little bit like, we'll give you the anti-venom,
Yep.
but please stop playing with the snakes, What are your thoughts on that? And is what I'm talking about a relevant approach to really help in this space?
So this is the prevention space, as you're saying.
Yeah.
Forgive me if I don't quite get exactly what you were getting at, but I think
wouldn't be the first time.
Prevention is the key to. In fact, I wouldn't say only prevention, intervention. So we know in life things happen all the time, and there are a lot of things you can't do anything about.
Yes.
So it's about learning, or we learn as we grow up, techniques or tools. It's like we have a tool belt of techniques that we can use when we are struggling with something. And most of the time, those techniques work. So it could be as simple as you have a fight with your partner, and you might decide to watch, play a game, and that's your way of de-stressing after that. Or it might have been a tough day at work, and you might decide to have a beer or two. So alcohol certainly is also a tool that people use to help relax, as is smoking and other things. The issue is going to be when something is no longer good for you. So having the occasional beer is one thing, but needing a lot of beer or not of alcohol in order to deal with the problem is another thing. So what we find is if you start using more of the things that you usually do, if you say drinking more or doing more drug taking, or so some of the things that you use to try and look after yourself, if they stop working or you're doing more of it, then those techniques on your tool belt aren't working. Yes. Then it can be really useful to talk to somebody or go online to Beyond Blue, to go on to, there's a lot, there's HALT, there's Mates in Construction, there's yourself, and see what other techniques can I learn to manage my emotions when I'm struggling. So some people have a bigger tool belt of techniques and things they use when they're struggling. Some people perhaps don't. Some people find talking about things really useful. Other people don't. We know there are some proven things. There's the tapping technique you talked about. There's exercise is really helpful. There are anger management strategies. There's meditation. There's all of those sorts of things. But they won't necessarily all work for you or work all the time. But where the prevention comes in is if you can build up your tool belt, things that you can use when you're struggling, because there will be times where it'll be harder than usual to deal with a particular event. And so what suicide is it's actually a strategy that people use, like a prevention strategy, it's to deal with the pain. They've tried other things on their tool belt and it's not working. And so they move into that space of, well, the only other thing I can think of is taking my life. But now I'm probably moving into a different area that you were going to go into.
Well, I think we'll eventually get there. But you talked about the tool belt,
Yeah,
and I just can't help but think that, particularly guys in the building industry just find it very, very difficult to ask for help.
yeah,
But I think that many of the guys, and I'm talking about the guys because that's predominantly who we work with on site, can notice when someone's a bit off, or maybe that they're leaning on some of those tools a little bit too much. They're using too many drugs, or they're drinking too much, or whatever, and people can just tell that their demeanor has changed. What can we offer people listening to this to put into their tool belt for an intervention? Because it's just a real tricky situation in that on-site scenario, because the person who's not feeling too good will generally say, "No, I'm good," or "Leave me alone," or "Mind your business," or something like that. And it puts people in a pretty tough situation, particularly if something does happen and I didn't do anything. But predominantly it's because I was either pushed away or I didn't know what to do. What can we give people to make them a little more effective?
Yeah, and that is a big one. So the first thing to do that I do when I do any sort of counselling is remind people to say, it could be in a conversation, if you cut your arm while you're doing work, you will go and get your arm attended to. You'll go to the hospital or you'll go to the doctor. If you have a headache that won't go away, you'll go and see somebody, probably eventually. I know men often might take a lot longer to actually go. But if you physically have an issue, generally we say it's more okay to go and say, I need help. So maybe turning to your mate and saying, look, this is no different from if you have cut yourself or something else, except this is about emotionally or in your head, you're struggling with something. So I've noticed some changes. That's the first thing that we say. If you've noticed changes in somebody, whatever that change is. So I've noticed you've become more quiet. I've noticed you've become more angry. I've noticed you're wearing the same clothes day and day. I don't know if a bloke says that to a bloke, but whatever it is that you've noticed, you're not sleeping. I can tell you're not sleeping, or you're forgetting things. I'm worried about you.
Yes.
As a mate, I'm wanting to be here to see what I can do to help. Is some version of that, whatever it is that feels most appropriate. Why do people push people away? It's because of shame, stigma around admitting that you're struggling with something. It's not only guys, women could do that as well, or professionals in the mental health industry. We do that a lot as well. So recognizing somebody's pushing you away doesn't necessarily mean they don't want help. It might be that they're worried about what you might think of them if they say, I'm struggling. So you need to make it okay for somebody to go, hey, you know what, mate? I have times when I struggle. So you're going to have times when you struggle. Well, when I struggle, somebody stepped up and gave me a hand. So I'm here just to say, you want to talk or whatever it is that folks do. Or do you want to go and have a beer after work or go and play a game or something like that?
Yeah. Perfect. I also noticed that you work with people post-suicide, so the people that suicide affects, and like I've been exposed to it, as I said, just recently. It's happened a couple of times just recently. I think I'm okay. I wasn't overly close. Yes, I knew them and I was friends with them, but it wasn't overly close. But when that happens, and it may not just be suicide that we're talking about, because my mind immediately went to one of my best friends, and it's been probably 12 years, where he got he got killed on a motorbike with his 12-year-old son. They both died in the same accident.
Wow.
And I was chatting with his wife just yesterday. What can we look out for? What are the signs? How can we, how do we process this so we can sort of move on and it not define us and cause us to sort of go down the dark hole? What can we do?
There is a tricky one. You talked, I think, earlier about prevention, also in the suicide space. So we have prevention, which is how do we stop people from going down there? Intervention, when somebody's got thoughts of suicide, and postvention, so after there's been a suicide. What we know is that if we can help people who've been exposed to a suicide or give them the support they need, we will reduce the likelihood that somebody may decide to take their own lives. So, in fact, postvention is like prevention. And that's why it's so important to have services or to make sure that you are given support. You said, how do we stop people from going down that dark alley or whatever? And I have to say that suicide is different from other deaths, that the impact that it has on somebody is far greater than almost any other traumatic event. And it has to do with guilt. It has to do with the why questions. It's the fact that there's never a satisfactory answer to why somebody takes their life to suicide. There may be some reasons that you find, but at the end of the day, somebody's made a decision not to be here. And that really stays behind with people around them. What, we should have noticed it. Why did they choose that? Are we not good enough? Do they not know how much we cared? Those sorts of things. So our support, and so that's my work in support after suicide, that work is around normalizing the fact that you're going to feel like shit for however long it takes. And the support that you need to give somebody or allow people to give you is really important for as long as you need it. Where the warning signs come in is if after, let's say, a month or two, you haven't shown any sort of improvement. So let's say you've impacted by a suicide of somebody you know. It could be a family member or a mate. And often what will happen is you feel really depressed, really down. You find it hard to do anything that you used to do before. If you're not slowly starting to do some of those things, that might be a time where you as a friend might go, you know what, I'm wondering whether you might benefit from talking to somebody. Grieving is totally natural, and there is no expectation that you're going to be totally okay. And that's important because sometimes people go, right, we've had a couple of months to grieve, now you should be fine. It doesn't work like that with suicide. It's very different. So all grieving is different, but you need to allow people the time and the space to actually, what happens is you create a new normal. You are never the same person again. You actually have to decide or create a new you. I know that sounds really weird. You talked about this as being a philosophical space, but in fact, that's what happens. You can't be the same person you were before.
Can you kind of expand on that? Because I find that profoundly interesting and important to sort of unpack a little bit more, because I suspect that many people don't get that and they try to get back to how they were before. And, as they say, you can't help be influenced. You cannot be not influenced by what happens around you, both good or bad. And, when there's an impactful experience, either positively or negatively, you're going to be a different person.
You are.
What can you sort of help us to understand about how to let go of trying to get back to how you were and accepting the new normal?
So one analogy might be if you have been in a motorbike accident and you break every bone in one leg, let's say. However good a job somebody does at putting that leg together, that leg will probably never be exactly the same.
Mm.
And you may have to find other things to do, whether you can ride a motorbike or not again, or other ways to deal with it. So it's kind of a little bit like that. If somebody, however, dies because of cancer or from an accident, in your head, you can go, there's a reason. It's not a great reason. I don't like it, particularly when they're children, all that sort of thing. But I kind of get why that happened. When somebody takes their life, let's say you look at Robin Williams, you go, but why?
Mm.
He's laughing all the time. He's a funny man. I don't get it. People struggle and they want to come up with a reason, and you actually can't really come up with a single reason that totally makes sense. You get it in bits and pieces, and you end up feeling a bit conflicted. So if I use my dad, yes, he had reasons. He was older. He didn't feel like he fitted anymore. He felt like he had no purpose, but he was loved. He had a role within our family. So on one hand, others will feel the same. You have this thing about, I get why he might have done it. And on the other hand, I don't get why he did it. And so people are stuck with that. The other thing, too, is to say that people who are impacted by suicide, the obvious ones are the friends, the family, that kind of thing. But what we know about suicide is there may be many people who don't even know the person who died by suicide, or, as you yourself mentioned, don't know them well. But some people might, in some way, empathize or feel that they understand some element of the person who's died. So there may be people who are like Robin Williams, who are happy-go-lucky, laugh a lot, and they cope with life by being that kind of a person, who then see Robin Williams take their life and they might think, well, if he can do it, he seemed to have everything. He's laughing, he's happy, I'm laughing, I'm happy. But he couldn't deal with his depression. I'm struggling to deal with my depression. If he does it, what's to stop me from doing it? I might as well do the same. Clearly he couldn't manage his depression. I can't manage my depression. That is dangerous thinking. It's quite normal to think that, but what you don't want to have is people keeping on down that track of, I don't see another option. I might as well do the same. And you need people to step in and go, whoa, actually, you have other options.
Mm.
You don't have to do the same thing as what somebody else has done. So children, it's a really big deal with adolescents, unfortunately, who in particular we see where they will make a decision to also take their life because somebody else has done it. The popular kid who's a school captain, well, if he does it, and he's got everything going for him, what's to stop me from doing it? That's the
Yeah.
impact we see. For every one person who dies from suicide, about 135 people are impacted. About
Wow.
10 are very impacted, but about 135 people are touched in some way. It's huge.
Mm. It's massive. That's
Why are they
yeah.
not doing anything about it? I mean, I'm like, what the heck? The government, everybody.
Settle down.
I know,
um, that leads me to and to when you were talking then, my reaction. I might get a bit of a therapy session here. My reaction when that happens, and I don't feel it when somebody dies via an accident or an illness, but when somebody that I know commits suicide, the first thing I experience is shock. The second thing I experience is anger, and I feel bad about feeling angry because I know logically that I don't have any clue what they were going through, and I can't connect with what they were feeling and what they were thinking and that sort of stuff. And I think from my perspective, because maybe I'm thinking rationally, I don't know. I'm just thinking I am. It's like, what about the immediate family? What about the kids? What about the wife? What about the poor person who finds them and there's that mess, and they have to live with that sort of shock? I think what an awful thing to thrust upon other people. Wasn't there a different way? I think that's why I end up thinking angry. I think that, but then I feel bad about thinking that because I don't understand, you know.
Yeah.
I'm sure that there are other people that go through this same thing. Is there a different way of processing it or a better way?
No, no, there is no better way. It's really important to acknowledge that anger is one of the emotions that you will experience, and that is actually very normal. How can you not feel angry at the idea that somebody has left a mess or left their family in a situation where they're all in such distress, impact around? It's completely normal. Um, and that's where there is that kind of a balance all the time between I'm angry, but I'm sad, and I get it, but I don't get it. Somebody who takes their life because the pain that they're in is so unbearable that they can't continue anymore. They literally can't see another way to end their pain. What we know is their thinking becomes quite closed. So when we go back to talking about when things don't go well in our lives, we usually have things, our tool belt, we've got things that we can do to help. But for some people, those things, as I spoke about earlier, stop working, and they then stop doing any of the things that used to work. They even get to the point where doing anything good for themselves is no longer an option. They can't see it. They become very narrowed. And depression really is about that. You know, the idea that you can't find joy in anything. So that idea of the pain being so overwhelming means you're not actually thinking clearly anymore. And those people who take their lives often have a fairly warped kind of a view about, I'm a burden to everybody else. And even if you say to them, well, you've got family who love them, in their heads, they genuinely feel like people would be better off without them being there, rather than recognizing actually people care. You know, what is it going to look like for them if I'm not around? And that's the work that's done with them through the counseling and the support, is helping them recognize that that burden is really in their own heads, if you know what I mean. So it's not like they go and take their lives knowing that they're going to cause all this pain. We know it happens. But unfortunately, they're not thinking clearly, which is why we need to get in there and recognize when somebody is struggling and get help before they go down there. We know people with thoughts of suicide actually don't want to die. They don't want to die. They want to be alive. They just can't see another option. We need to help them see the other options. We need to be able to ask openly, hey, mate, you know, I'm really worried. You're showing all these signs. You know, I've done a first aid course, if you like, or I've listened to the Toolshed podcast, and I heard somebody say it's actually okay to ask the questions. I want to ask you, are you having thoughts of suicide? Are you having thoughts about wanting to kill yourself? We need to ask that openly, because you can't put the idea in someone's head.
Yeah, well, that's super important and
That is it.
a wonderful thing to say, because I'm sure that people sort of walk around and tread on eggshells because they don't want to say that, because if it then did happen, they might somehow make a weird connection to say that they weren't thinking about it until I mentioned it. It's like, and that would never happen. That would just never happen.
Never.
But this is a beautiful segue, because the next questions that I wanted to ask is tell us about your consulting business, the training that's available, and how people get started. Like, what is available and how do people get started? Because we can talk about this till the cows come home. Really, what people need to do is do the equivalent to go to St. John's Ambulance and do their first aid. They need to come to see you and do the equivalent of that for the mental health side of things. So what sort of stuff do you offer? What can we learn, and how do we get into it?
Yes. Most of my training comes from accredited, well-researched organizations. So I have training through what's called Living Works. And I do their training because there's been a lot of research about the value of their training. It's very well researched. I also do training on behalf of Mental Health First Aid Australia. So with regard to Living Works, they have two lots of training. One of them is probably the one that I would say I feel everybody should do, and that is called SAYF Talk, What I like about Safe Talk, it's a 3 to a 4 hour training session, so it's fairly short, and it teaches you, number one, how do I pick up the signs that somebody is struggling with perhaps with thoughts of suicide. Number one, how do I recognize the signs? Number two, how do I ask that question? And we do just as we did now, Mick, you and I, where we normalize the fact that it's okay to ask somebody the suicide question, because we can't put that idea in someone's head. Number three, the next fear that people have is, what if they say yes? What the heck am I going to do now? So I teach in my training what you do with that yes question. What we don't do in the training is ask you to then come up with a plan to keep them safe or any of that stuff. What we do is we talk to you and we work together with you to work out, who would you pass this person on to? How would you refer them on to help? Where are the places that they can go for support? So you do all of that in about a 3.5 hour session. So my website, you can contact me if you're interested. Assist is 2-day training where you do the same thing. But I think every workplace, most people, if not everybody, should do Safe Talk. And then you need to identify 1 or 2 people, depending how big your organization is, who are trained in Assist, because they are the people, those who have done Safe Talk would refer somebody on to an Assist person.
Yes.
Assist teaches you how to put a plan together, how to work out what level of risk that person is at. So it's a far more comprehensive type of training. And of course, not everybody's got the time or the inclination to want to do that. Then on the other hand, I've got a mental health first aid, which is like that equivalent of St. John's. I can do it online. I can do it a mixture of online and face-to-face, or I can do it all face-to-face. It is 2-day training if it's face-to-face, and otherwise it's about 12 hours in total if it's online. And I help people learn what are the most common issues that people struggle with as adults. And we know, for instance, depression, anxiety, they're pretty big ones. Alcohol and drug use come into it as well. So we talk through, how do I know maybe what it is that my mate's struggling with, or me myself, and what do I do with that? How do I then have that conversation with them? Like you asked me earlier, hey, just noticed that, you've been drinking a bit more than usual. I've noticed some changes. How are you going? I'm a bit worried about you. And being able to practice having that kind of a conversation. And then again, so it's more general mental health. We do include suicide as well, but it is just a small component of everything that we do. So the best way to do it is my website, Bottern Consulting. So if you look up Bottern Consulting, I find the easiest thing is, if you're a workplace, I'll come in, I'll deliver to a group of your employees. It's probably the easiest thing to do. I'll choose a time that works for you. You probably need about a minimum of 8 people. I can do a maximum of 30 for the Safe Talk, so it's a pretty big, decent number. Contact me and I'll give you a quote. We'll chat through what that might look like.
Yeah, beautiful. With the Safe Talk, is that can it be an online thing, like a Zoom type thing, or does it have to be face-to-face in the room?
It has to be face-to-face in the room, and that's because even when we're talking today, Mick, and I know you probably normally would say that, but this kind of conversation may cause people to reflect on themselves and think about the fact that they may be having thoughts themselves, or they're worried about somebody else. If there's nobody around to then have that conversation with, we create a safe space. I have somebody who's there with me. And if somebody needs to talk, they'll go out of the room and have a chat with them, because it's very easy to feel triggered. Yeah. So putting it out there as well, guys, if there's anybody out there and you're beginning to have some of those thoughts, whenever it suits you, I'm happy to go through some of my numbers, Mick, some of the places to go for support. Yeah. But yes, it has to be face-to-face, Assist and Safe Talk.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. We'll definitely put those links that you mentioned and your website in the description, so everyone will just be able to click on them and contact you. A
couple here that I've got. So there is an app called SAYF, SAYF, SAYF.
Okay. Yep.
So it's something that two mates can decide to do. If you've got somebody that you're worried about, they can nominate you as a safe person. There's an app where you touch base with them every day to check how they are. So there is that. There's HALT. There is Mates in Construction. There's Bluehats. So yes, by all means, put it on your website. But main thing is, if you're sitting there with thoughts at the moment, Lifeline or Suicide Callback Line, they're amazing. Pick up the phone. You don't have to say who you are. You don't have to say where you are. And you can just say, hey, I'm struggling, or I'm struggling because I've lost a mate, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Great advice. Thank you very much. I just want to, show my appreciation for your generosity of time and your knowledge as well. This is a really, really important conversation, this topic. And, quite often we're a lot more jokey and a lot more laughy and a lot more fun in the podcast. And but this topic, is super important, and there is so much legislation and requirement and commitment that a small business owner needs to commit to, from the perspective of OH&S, to a ridiculous point, where people are strapping themselves to the roof and they're going to hurt themselves more by being strapped up there than falling off the roof onto the deck. They're just asked to do ridiculous things, but there is legislation and compliance to do that sort of thing. And I just feel that there probably should be a lot more effort put into this space for people to learn what to do and preventative strategies and changing the culture and the vibe of an organisation can really contribute to how people feel and prevent them from potentially even having those thoughts, because they're part of a community that recognises their efforts and accepts that that everyone has deficiencies, and they're part of a community that they can contribute to, but also recognises their value as well. I think can go a long way to the prevention of this. So thank you very much for jumping on the podcast. I'm sure we're going to be talking again. Love to see you in the tool shed as well. Potentially answering questions and whatever that people might have inside the tool shed would be really, really cool. So
thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much. Thank
you. Bye.
Absolute pleasure. So I hope you enjoyed that, folks. Sonja Bottern. The website is botternconsulting.com. We'll make sure that it's in the description, with also links to Bluehats and the other SAYF app and the other things that Sonja mentioned. We'll make sure we've got links in there, so you don't need to remember them. The links will be in the description. You can just go ahead and click them. So thanks for listening, and we will have another episode of The Tool Shed coming your way before you know it. So go well until then. I'm Mick Horse from Builders Business Black Belt. That is it. Bye for now.